Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today we're doing the driver bio of Charles Leclerc, the Monaco native who drives for Team Ferrari in the Scarlet number 16. He started out his 2023 season at a value of $21.2 million, and the value went up to 23.5. So it's not as big a jump as some drivers, but that's fine. But right away, remember, you only get $100 million for your whole team. So to get him on your team right away would have cost a solid 21% of your overall operating budget. Going into it, the qualification for round one in Bahrain, he got third. Good for him. And then that's when the trouble started. He got a DNF on the 39th lap and was out of the race. So he ended up taking a negative 11 fantasy points for the first round of the season, which, if you're a Ferrari Puritan, that really bothers you, but don't worry, you have faith. He's a prospect, not a suspect, so everything's fine. Going into the next round, qualified second, finished seventh. Again, that's fine. He got 27 points, which is good. He's still over that, for that race at least. You spent, $21 million on him. You get 27 points. That's good. But if you're a Ferrari fan, a follower, you see the fact that he finished worse than he started, and that's not good. And the same for us. We want people to finish better than they started, so that way you get those points instead of getting it subtracted. Because remember, they take your starting position, your finishing position, and whatever that delta is, if you finish behind, you get negative that many points. If you finish ahead, you get positive that many points. So round 3, Australia started 7th, fine, and got a DNF with 0 laps. Now, and this part's telling. He had 0 laps, he got a DNF, but no one else had 0 laps DNF, which means, I don't know, Alex Albon retired 6 laps later, so maybe he had gotten some battle damage. I don't quite remember. But for those of you playing along at home, this is the 3rd race, and he hasn't finished 2 of them. All right? Which, again, I'm not saying you can't be a Ferrari fan. I'm not saying that Ferrari is a bad team. I'm not saying that he's a bad driver. I'm saying for this game where we have to pick drivers and get points based off their performance, so far somebody has spent 21% of all of their money in the game on him, and he's cost them more points than he's gotten. So if you started out being a Ferrari faithful, it's not working for you so far, at least in the 2023 season. Azerbaijan, he qualifies first. Sweet, everyone's happy. He finishes 3rd. Hey, he's got his first podium and 29 fantasy points. But now this is when it gets really rough for us playing the fantasy game. Is now basically, if you go with Charles Leclerc, you're either going to finish in the podium and finish really well, or you're going to get crashed out. And that is a huge gamble, because if we were just going any one-off game, well, then got it. It's a coin flip, it seems. At this point, he's crashed out half the time. It's a coin flip whether he does great or he does bad. But in the fantasy world, we care about those trends. And so if I have Charles Leclerc on my team, the fact that he crashed out early one round ago, and the fact that he crashed out 2 rounds ago, all those points still matter to him if he was on my team when that occurred. So whoever has had Ferrari for all 4 rounds now is really torn, because he's gotten in the podium and he's crashed out equal time. So what do you do? Do you keep him or do you not? Round number 5, Miami. Qualified 7th, finished 7th. Fine, at least stayed in the game. 16 points, but it's not impressive, right? This guy was on the podium. This guy is supposed to be a contender, and you're spending $21 million to have him finish the same place Lando Norris finished the race before, to have him finish the same place that, not Lando Norris. I was looking at qualifying, not the race. To finish the same place Lance Stroll finished the week before, the same place Nico Hülkenberg finished 7th in Australia. All right? So, if now fast forward to Miami and you have Charles Leclerc finishing 7th, well, there's about $15 million difference between them, and you could be spent, and you're getting the same value from Leclerc from a Ferrari as you are from Nico Hülkenberg in a Haas. That's got to be, at this point in the season, that's got to be weighing on your conscience. Round 7 wasn't there, was rained out or whatever went wrong with round 7 in Italy. Monaco, round 6 in Italy. Round 7, Monaco, his home soil, where everyone's expecting him to do well for this one, right? Qualified 3, finished 6th, got 16 points. Fine, not bad. But again, who finished 6th the previous race was Lewis Hamilton. Okay, that's pretty good. Finished Lewis Hamilton 6th the race before that. Lando Norris, fine. And then Carlos Sainz. So 6th is a little bit better than 7th, but it's still not the knock your doors off performance that everyone was hoping for him on his home soil. Into Spain, qualified 19th, whatever that was about, who knows. And then he finished race 11th, which is good for us fantasy drivers. He passed a lot of people. He finished out of the points, but he got us 14. And the issue again here is not that he is a bad driver. The issue here for fantasy players is not questioning him. It's the fact that we're putting at this point, if you've had him this whole time, you're putting all of the money that you could be putting other places into him, and the points just aren't adding up yet. So, on to round 9 in Canada, qualified 11th, finishes 4th, exactly what we're looking for, 19 fantasy points. Now you're starting to get that yo-yo effect, right? Now you've gone, well, he's not DNF anymore, he's not on the podium, he's in the middle of the pack, and now he's finishing 4th, and you want to try and keep him around now. 10th, qualifies 2nd, finishes 2nd. Sweet, gets 32 fantasy points, everyone's happy about it. Great Britain qualifies 4th, finishes 9th. Only 6 fantasy points. Come on, what's going on? At least it's not a DNF. At least now he seems to be bouncing around the top. That's good. Hungary qualifies 6th, finishes 7th. Okay, he goes positive. He gets 12 fantasy points. But again, he's not on the podium, which you're spending. Like, there's very few drivers more expensive than him in the race at this point, right? You have your Lewis Hamilton, you have your Max Verstappen, and I think that's it. And I have to check the prices. I have them written down over here. So Belgium, all right, qualifies 2nd, finishes 3rd. Again, another podium. It's wonderful. He gets 26 fantasy points. But Red Bull, Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen are the 2 people that beat him. And so if you're a Ferrari faithful at this point, you're not beating Red Bull. So as fantasy drivers, remember I said earlier in one of the other podcasts, there's 2 kinds of drivers. You can have your casual drivers, or you can have the nothing personal drivers, right? Then casual drivers, if you love Ferrari, you keep Ferrari in your team. It doesn't matter how bad they are, right? A lot like politics right now. As soon as you have your side and you're going to stay in your camp and you refuse to view anything negative as truly negative and everything good you see I was right so far. Well, if you have Charles Leclerc on your team at round 13 in 2023, you're telling yourself, yep, I knew he could do it. He finished on the podium again. Never mind now that I think he has just as many podiums as he does DNFs. But the problem is you're spending $21 million a race to keep him on your roster, and the numbers just don't seem to be going there, where you have people like Lando Norris that are going to be starting to muscle their way in. Round 14, the Netherlands. Qualified 9th and gets a DNF on lap 41. All right, and he gets negative 7 points for that round. Then the very next race. So now if you're thinking, man, I don't know if I should keep him around. Italy and Monza, qualifies 3rd, finishes 4th. Again, doing very well, gets 24 points, and that's all good. In Singapore, qualifies 3rd, finishes 4th again, 22 points. Great. So he's, off. He's off the problems. Japan qualifies 4th, finishes 4th. So he's not blowing the doors off, but he gets another 22 fantasy points. Man, he's back on it. He's doing fine. In Qatar, round 18, qualifies 5th, finishes 5th. In round 19, qualifies 1st, finishes 3rd. So again, another podium. Great. And all these points are just racking up. Mexico qualifies 1st, finishes 3rd again. Back-to-back podiums, back-to-back poles, qualifying back-to-back podiums. Brazil qualifies 2nd. That's okay. Boom, gets a DNF when he collides with Alex Albon and Kevin Magnussen. As we talked about on the Alex Albon podcast. So that stinks, and now he goes ahead and has this wonderful week that he now gets negative 3 points for. Going into Las Vegas, qualifies 1st, finishes 2nd, 41 points, only behind Max Verstappen. And if you watch that Vegas race, if I remember correctly, if you'd given him maybe, because Max's tires I think were about cooked, if you'd given him 1 or 2 or 3 more laps, he probably could have overtaken Max. But that was it. There's only, 50 laps there. And then going into Abu Dhabi, the last race, he qualified second, finished second with 29 points. So all of that to say, let's scroll back up to the top here and talk about it all. He finished it with 335 fantasy points and a 0.65 points per million. Arguably one of the top producers. Like, you have other people with better points, right? So who do we have here? Let's go make it so I can kind of see everything. Who is the only people to score more points than him are, so you had Fernando Alonso, all right? You had George Russell, which I think they were both cheaper. You have Lando Norris came back, right? McLaren, who saw this happening the whole while that, Charles Leclerc is bouncing back and forth between DNF and the podium. Lando Norris came sneaking up in there. Lewis Hamilton, again, remember I mentioned earlier, or maybe it was on a different podcast, at the three top teams at this point, at least in 2023, or you have your Red Bull, you have your Mercedes, and you have your Ferrari. And as soon as you have Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc struggling, bouncing back and forth between do-not finishes and podiums, and you have then it's very easy to have that money be put in Red Bull or Mercedes. Well, Red Bull absolutely in 2023, but Mercedes, because Lewis Hamilton is finishing with more points. And then Max Verstappen, he had double points that everybody else put together. Not really, but whatever. And then you have Sergio Perez that had 581 fantasy points for the year. The crushing statistic about Charles Leclerc. The crushing statistic about Charles Leclerc is that he finished the year with a 0.65 points per million. Liam Lawson, all right, the guy who got pulled in when Daniel Ricciardo broke his hand, got flown in like last minute, thrown in the seat to the race, and got 5 races under his belt. His points per million in an AlphaTauri was 0.71. Now, got it, and I fully acknowledge that you get more points with, more points with Ferrari because they're worth more and they are doing more. But if you do the math to figure out how many points you get per $1 million you spend on him, you get better points per million with Liam Lawson than you do with Charles Leclerc. That stinks. And why is that? Why does that happen? Well, it's because of the 4 do not finishes that he got. 18% of the time, 1 in 5, there's 1 in 5 chance that he won't even finish the race, let alone podiums, right? So he completed all 22 rounds. He had 78 overtakes, averaged about 3.5 overtakes per race. Good. 6 podiums, which is wonderful. 30%, 27%, but call it 30% of the time, he is going to finish on the podium. And 70% of the time, 72% of the time, he finishes in the top 10. 18% of the time, he doesn't finish. And then 10% of the time, he's in the bottom 10 and not DNFing. So the way to look at this is that 90% of the time, he's going to finish in the top 10 or he's going to crash out. And 27, 37, 40, roughly half the time, it's a coin flip. And if you land heads, he finishes. If he lands heads, then it's roughly, again, a little less than a coin flip of whether he's going to finish in the podium or he's going to crash out. Those are just really, really, really dicey numbers. And he put up fine points, but were his points worth the $23 million that he was worth at the end of the season, right? Personally, I don't think it was. However, Ferrari is the team that I just grew to not trust him throughout the course of the year. And then in my buddy league that we were doing, my friends league, somebody believed in them. I didn't. They got Ferrari on their team, and those last few races that Charles Leclerc was driving, where'd it go? Come on back. Where'd it go? He got Charles Leclerc on his team because he could afford him, and I couldn't. And that means that the qualified second, finished second, qualified first, finished second, and those last 2 races, where he did really, really well, pushed the other guy in my league ahead by like 12 points at the very end, and my team came in third because both of his teams had Charles Leclerc. I think it was Charles Leclerc, maybe it was the other guy, but both his teams had Charles Leclerc. I couldn't afford him. He got Leclerc on his team, took the gamble. I didn't want it. Leclerc actually performed, and I came in fourth overall in my friends league. So I fully acknowledge that other people have faith in Ferrari that I don't. For me, it's not that I don't have faith in them. They're just way overvalued. But they need to be, because as soon as you're giving Charles Leclerc, as soon as you can get Charles Leclerc on your team for $15 million, everyone's going to do it. And then it's going to be like Max Verstappen, right? Everybody has Max Verstappen, because if you don't have Max Verstappen on your team, in 2023 at least, you're going to lose. It doesn't matter how expensive he is. You need to have him on your team. And whoever didn't just wasn't even competitive. As soon as you drop the Ferrari's driver's value, even 25 or 30%, everybody's going to have them on their team. And it's going to turn into okay, everyone has Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Then it's up to whoever you get for the other two drivers. So I fully understand why they value him so much, and all he had to do is, again, stay out of the wall. He had those, and I did this in a different podcast as well. He had 4 DNFs. Well, what happens if each one of those DNFs is worth negative 20 points? So if you add 80 points onto his total fantasy points, 380, 94, 410, he has 415 points then all of a sudden. As soon as he has 415 points, that means the only people who beat him in the entire league is Lando Norris would still beat him, Lewis Hamilton would still beat him, Max Verstappen would still beat him. He would have been fourth. Oh, all right, never mind. And Sergio Perez. So if he had done that and he had gotten those points, he would have been much, much, much more competitive. That would have been wonderful. He would have been the great person to have on your team. But because of those 4 DNFs, it makes it so I have to question whether he was valued. Because even if those negatives, if he just worked those out to be a null, I think a lot more people would have had Charles Leclerc on their team. I probably would have kept him, and it would have impacted everything. So I'm, again, not saying don't take Ferrari for 2024. I'm saying you have to be leery about it because of their performances between the two of them. They crashed 6 times, which if you take 6, 4 times 6 is 24. That means, and I know stats don't work this way, but a quarter of the time, odds are a quarter of the time a Ferrari would crash out. Not do bad, not finish in the bottom 10, but no kidding, crash out. So again, hopefully they do better next time. Either hopefully they decrease their value so more people will buy them, or they stay out of the wall and then everybody fights for them, and then it turns into a thing. Well, do you have the Ferrari drivers or do you have Max Verstappen? And I really do think with people mimicking Red Bull's RB19, so Red Bull's car was so dominant that the other constructors have to be stealing ideas from Red Bull. And since they are, I'm really excited to see what the car's like. As soon as you give Ferrari a great car, where their one lap pace, which was wonderful, Matt begins to influence their race pace, where they can keep those paces going, and you have your Carlos Sainz and your Charles Leclerc, where they're no longer starting the race at P2 and then finishing P5. Now they're starting P2, finishing P2 constantly. Then it's game over, man. If you get rid of all their DNFs, if you keep them out of the wall, and knock off the race pace, then they're wonderful. But it just depends on if that will happen next year. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening. I will see you next time. Cheers.